Hey everyone, here with a quick video demonstrating how to draw environment diagrams involving objects via technique described in Sequoia's textbook. Let's get right into it. And so here we have the dog class being defined with the class variable name and the function bark or method. And so here we also have the Chihuahua class being defined, and we see that it inherits from the dog class. And so let's just take this line by line. For this line, as we know, class definitions, well, they're similar to function definitions in that we're going to consider everything in this sequence of lines. And so to draw this, what we're going to do is we're going to draw a class frame. And so this would be a class frame for dog. And frames have parents. In this case, object is sort of like the global frame because all objects inherit from the object class, and we'll just say parent equals object. Don't think too much about this. And then we'll define our class attribute over here, name, which is Fido, and the method bark, which, as we normally do, points to a function bark. And an important rule to note is that the parents of functions must be function frames, and the parents of class frames must be class frames. And so this is a new concept. So function versus class frames. So in this case, the current class frame or function frame is global. Let me actually just draw that over here. Global. All right, so we just have two types of frames going on. And let's go ahead and define the next class, which will be class Chihuahua. And as we can see, this inherits from dog, and so in this case, the parent will be dog. And we have the class variable name, the method, which is a instance method as we have on parameter specified. So that points to the instance method bark, which takes in argument of self. And again, we are still in the global frame because we're dealing with a function definition. And then we have bark2, which is a class method as it doesn't take any arguments. And again, we're still in the global frame. All right. And how about we actually put these? And so we have our class frames, but they will still be defined in our global frame via their names. So this dog points there. Chihuahua will point to the Chihuahua frame. All right, and this arrow is basically pointing to this whole frame. So that's a new idea. And so let's get into the actual would Python display over here. So we have dog.bark. And because dog is a class, as we can see, we have the dog class, this will call the method bark as though it's as a function. And so we just do what we would normally do. The operator is bark. There are no operands, and we shall apply and open a new frame, F1, for the function bark. Parent equals global, as we said here. And what we'll step into the body of bark, and all we do is print rough. And so that does that. And this returns none. Moving on, we have Rocky equals Chihuahua parentheses. And so when you see a class name followed by parentheses, this is more complicated than it looks. But essentially, we are going to be calling the Chihuahua constructor to instantiate a new Chihuahua instance. And what that means is, well, let's look at the Chihuahua class. there is no init method. We'll get to init later. And so we're just going to go ahead and create a instance frame for this new Chihuahua instance. And so look at what we did here. We had class dog and class Chihuahua frames. We're going to make a new class frame, except now we're making an instance frame for, and this is an instance of the Chihuahua class, and its parent is Chihuahua. This is tricky because all you have to remember is that for instance frames, their parent is the class of which they are an instance of. All right, and we don't have to actually put anything in this frame. It's just going to be blank for now because we don't have an init method defined here. We'll get to more on that later over here. And so when we look for, and okay, let's define that as Rocky. Forget to bind to the LHS. Cool. Okay, so now we see, so this doesn't show anything, this line. There's nothing to display, but we did make our Chihuahua instance. And so when we look for Rocky.name, well, just as the rules specified before with normal function frames, we will look to, well, the thing on the left-hand side of the dot tells us which class frame to look at. And so we're going to look at the class frame here, corresponding to where Rocky points. And we're going to look for name. It's not there. So just like before, we're going to look in the parent, which is Chihuahua. And so when we look in the Chihuahua frame, we find that the name is Little. And so the name is Little. And again, this is the left-hand side tells us which class frame to look in. Which class frame to look in. Talking about dot notation. All right. Looking here, this is tricky. When we call a method via an instance, the left-hand side of the dot tells us which class frame to look in. And so in this case, we'll look at Rocky and see that points to this frame, which is blank right now. And the right-hand side tells us the name of the variable or attribute we're looking for, which in this case is the function bark. And so we'll look in here, and we don't see bark. And so as before, we'll look in our parent frame, which is Chihuahua, over here, and we see that bark points to this function. So we found our operator. There are no operands, and let's apply. So F2, again, going by function frames for this, we have bark, or in this case, we have, make things clear, Chihuahua dot bark. Parent is global, where it was defined. And if we go and look for that, oh, and so a new step, I almost forgot again, is that we see that bark takes in one argument because it's an instance method. It's called self in this case. And so what is self supposed to be? Well, self is basically whatever was on the left-hand side, like the instance that the method was called on, naturally. And so self, all that does is point to the instance Chihuahua frame, points to this frame. And so that takes care of what this is. That was just telling us which Chihuahua we were looking at this instance. And so now that that's done, we bound our full parameters. We'll go into the body and print yep. Alrighty. And then we'll move on to the next line, Rocky.park2. And so let's look for evaluate our operator, which is bark. Well, first we'll look in the Rocky frame because this told us to look in the Rocky frame. Bark2 isn't there. Look at our parent. Bark2 is right here. And okay, so let's apply bark2 to what? You may be thinking that we open F3. However, if you notice, bark2, forgot the squigglies, or it's over here, it takes in no arguments, but we're calling it on the instance Rocky, which implicitly passes itself in as first argument, as the first argument, as we did here. Remember, we passed in self, which was this pointer to Rocky's frame. Well, when we have a function that takes in 0 arguments and we pass in a pointer to a frame, that's an argument to a 0 argument function, we will get an error too many arguments got 1 expected 0. All right, so just remember this implicit passing of the instance. I'll stop this video here for now.